U.S. midterm elections yielded a divided Congress. Democrats have hung on to the Senate and even added one critical seat, and the Republicans, in turn, claimed the House of Representatives from the Democrats. So it's no longer a Democratic sweep. It is now very much a divided Congress that limits the legislation going forward over the next few years. To be sure, the Democrats can still do things. They can dominate committees. They can appoint, as needed, Supreme Court justices. There is room for executive orders from the president and so on. But in terms of major legislative achievements, there is not a lot of scope for that. Markets actually usually like a divided Congress, limits, I suppose, how much trouble politicians can get into. And this could be important going forward to the extent that the fiscal environment is changing in a way that makes the bond market less tolerant of fiscal excesses. And so perhaps the US is less at risk of running into those sorts of problems. Bond market is caring more about government borrowing and government financing, in part because public debt is high and rising, in part because central banks are no longer absorbing much of that debt as quantitative easing has ended and even reversed, and in part just because borrowing costs are going up. It's making everything more expensive for governments. This is a tricky time, though, because you've got the bond market more sensitive, less tolerant of all this borrowing, and yet governments will probably want to provide some support during the next downturn. And it's tricky as well because we think structurally this may be an era of big government. You have big energy subsidies happening right now, pressures to increase military spending in a more dangerous geopolitical world, rising spending obligations for aging populations, green spending as deglobalization happens, more spending on industrial policy. And so I guess the story is one in which governments would like to spend a lot. Bond markets don't want them to. It could be interesting. At a minimum, there should be more differentiation between well-behaved and poorly behaved sovereigns.